What's up, guys? It's Hendog, and today we are going to talk about the time in NBA history when a player won the NBA MVP despite his team missing the playoffs. Let's get right into it. The NBA MVP is the highest individual award in basketball, usually given to the best player that season. But winning the MVP isn't as simple as it sounds. If that were the case, LeBron could hypothetically have won the MVP every season this past decade. Usually the MVP is decided by a combination of factors. How many times has the player won the award in the past? Is there an interesting narrative behind the player's season? How good is the surrounding cast around said player? And the topic of this video, what record/seed did the player lead his team to? While the MVP signifies that the winner is the best player in the NBA that season, in most cases it's usually given to the best player on one of the best teams. The most recent outlier to this rule was Russell Westbrook in 2017, who led the Thunder to the 6th seed in the Western Conference. In that year, Westbrook had two key narratives that swung the voters towards his way. One, he was the first player since Oscar Robertson in 1962 to average a triple-double for the entire season, and he broke the record for the most triple-doubles in a season with 42. Two, his former co-star Kevin Durant left the Thunder to join the Golden State Warriors, and in turn the media made KD out as the snake who abandoned his friend, while Russ became this hero who prioritized loyalty over all. But there is a case in NBA history where a player won the league's most valuable player without leading his team to the playoffs, and that was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in 1976. Kareem was statistically dominant in 1976 as he averaged 27.7 points per game, 16.9 rebounds per game, 5 assists per game, 4.1 blocks per game, and 1.5 steals per game on 53% shooting from the field. That season, Kareem led the league in rebounds per game and blocks per game, ranked second behind Bob McAdoo in points per game, ranked 15th in assists per game, and 25th in steals per game. So Kareem placed in the top 25 in all 5 major statistical categories and was half assists per game and 1/10 of a steal per game from leading the Lakers in all those categories. He did all this while having the 5th best field goal percentage. So yeah, Kareem definitely had the stats to back up his case. So with Kareem dominating the stat sheet, why'd the Lakers only win 40 games that season and miss out on the playoffs? Well, it comes down to 2 factors. One, there was always this narrative that followed Kareem his entire career that he couldn't lead teams to greatness. Yes, he's a 6-time champion, but many fans point to the fact that those teams had Oscar Robertson and Magic Johnson, the true leaders of those teams. In the 5 seasons between Oscar and Magic, Kareem missed the playoffs twice and only reached the conference finals once, where they got swept by the eventual champs in the Portland Trail Blazers. For arguably the best player in the league in an era where the talent pool was divided between the ABA and the NBA, only making the conference championship once and not even winning a game is pretty damning. The second reason, which is more obvious on the surface, is that the players on this Lakers team simply weren't good. Lucius Allen, Cornell Warner, Don Ford, Corky Calhoun, stop me when you can recognize any of these names, Donnie Freeman, Cazzie Russell, Stu Lance. There are probably 3 people on this team that you might recognize besides from Kareem. Pat Riley, who is known as the legendary coach for the Showtime Lakers and now serves as the GM of the Miami Heat. He wasn't a good NBA player. Kermit Washington, who punched Rudy Tomjanovich, fracturing his skull and breaking his nose and jaw in the process, and forcing Rudy to have facial reconstructive surgery, and Gail Goodrich, who played his last season as a Laker that year and had his last good year as a pro, averaging 19.5 points and 5.5 assists on 44% shooting. If you look at the team stats, it doesn't get much better. They rank 3rd in points per game, but once you look at the defensive side of the ball, you start to see why this team only won 40 games. They allowed the 2nd most points per game at 106.8, trailing only behind the 40-win Rockets. They allowed the most rebounds per game, despite having the best center in his prime, and they allowed the 3rd most assists per game. The Lakers, however, did lead the league in blocks, but when you look into it, 4.1 of their 6.4 blocks per game came from Kareem. They didn't have a great offensive or defensive rating and finished with a positive 0.1 net rating. This 1976 Lakers team had either old ABA players, young guys who aren't good enough, or stalwarts from the Wilt Chamberlain/Jerry West era of Lakers basketball. They simply weren't built to win, and it would take a few years for them to become the Showtime Lakers we know and be the face of basketball during the 1980s. So the question remains, how did Kareem win the MVP despite his team missing the playoffs? First, let's look at why the other candidates didn't take home the award. We'll look at Bob McAdoo, Dave Cowens, and Rick Barry, since they all received 20+ first place votes, and they seemed like the only real contenders for this award race. Rick Barry, the 4th place finisher in 1976, would experience his worst year as a pro at that point, as he averaged only 21 points per game, a 9-point difference from 1975, and his lowest scoring output of his career so far, on just 43.5% shooting from the field, also the lowest of his career. Looking at his 1976 stats in comparison to his earlier years, it's shocking that he even placed 4th in this award race and got 20 first place votes. Barry's team, the Golden State Warriors, did finish with the best record in the NBA at 59-23 and had a top 5 offense and defense. Also, Barry was the Warriors' leading scorer, but only by 1 point, and Barry shot 4% worse than guard Phil Smith. This has the look of a legacy pick. Dave Cowens finished third in the MVP voting in 1976, but the difference between him and Kareem is very close. Cowens won 378 points, just 31 less than Kareem's 409, and had only 4 less first place votes. Cowens' entire career wasn't really known as a scorer, averaging just above 18 points per game during his time with the Celtics, and only eclipsing the 20 point per game mark twice in his 10 seasons with Boston. 1976 was more of the same for the center, as he averaged 19 points per game, 16 rebounds per game, second behind Kareem, and just over 4 assists per game and about a block and steal per game. He was the best player and surprisingly the highest scorer on the best team in the Eastern Conference, but Cowens simply didn't have the stats to take home the award. This choice was just selecting the best player from one of the best teams. Bob McAdoo, the league's reigning MVP, finished just 16 points behind Kareem in the MVP voting. Funny enough, McAdoo had 1 less first place vote than Cowens, but accumulated more second place votes. Statistically, McAdoo was neck and neck with Kareem this season. He led the league in scoring at 31 points per game, averaged 12.5 rebounds per game, 4.5 less than Kareem, but taking into account McAdoo is about half a foot shorter than Kareem, it makes up for that. 4 assists per game, 2 blocks per game, and just over a steal per game on 49% shooting. I think McAdoo not winning this award comes down to the fact that his team, the Buffalo Braves, only won 6 more games than the Lakers. If McAdoo replicated these numbers on the 59-win Warriors or the 54-win Celtics, he probably would have been the 1976 MVP. I mentioned this earlier, but another factor to consider is the presence of the ABA. George Gervin, David Thompson, R.S. Gilmore, Roby Freed, and obviously Julius Erving played in an entirely different league, so the NBA talent pool was diluted in 1976 as a result. Players who dominated in that league weren't even considered for NBA awards. Let's talk about Kareem's case against Julius Erving, the 1976 ABA MVP. Erving in that season averaged 29.5 points, 11 rebounds, 5 assists, 2.5 steals, and 2 blocks on 51% shooting. Those stats are very comparable to Kareem like Bob McAdoo, but unlike McAdoo, Dr. J's team, the New York Nets, won 55 games that season. If Dr. J replicated those numbers in the NBA and his team had similar success, he would have won the MVP over Kareem in 1976. It should also be noted that David Thompson also had a great year for the Denver Nuggets this season and led his team to the best record in the ABA. I'm not sure that his stats would have put him over Kareem, but he definitely had a better case than Dave Cowens or Rick Barry did in 1976. So how did Kareem win the MVP despite not making the playoffs? Well, it comes down to a few factors. 1, Kareem was just statistically the best player in the NBA that season. He was top 25 in every statistical category, and he probably had his best all-around season. Despite him not making the playoffs, the players voting probably thought it was an accomplishment that the Lakers even won 40 games. This is very similar to the argument voters had for Westbrook back in 2017. Both their teams were so bad outside the MVP that it was impressive that they even won as much as they did. Kareem had a VORP, or value over replacement player, of 9.04, which calculates to a win above replacement player of 24.5. So if the Lakers had a Mel Red center in 1976, they would have been the worst team in the NBA at 16 wins. Also, there really wasn't another player who was on par statistically that year besides Bob McAdoo, and even his team, the Buffalo Braves, only finished with 46 wins. And finally, the diluted talent pool caused by the existence of the ABA eliminated players such as Dr. J and David Thompson, who had better MVP cases than the other top candidates in 1976. So this brings up 2 questions. Did the voters get it right by selecting Kareem as the 1976 MVP? And 2, will we ever see a scenario like this again in NBA history? In terms of the 1976 MVP, I think the players actually did get it right by voting Kareem. While I'm a firm believer that the best player must lead his team to wins, there really wasn't another standout candidate for this award. You had great players in Kareem and McAdoo on not-so-great teams, and 2 players in Rick Barry and Dave Cowens who didn't put up eye-popping numbers and were only there because their teams had the best record that season. It was a difficult choice, and that's why the race was so close. In a case like this, the MVP should just go whoever the best player was that season, and in 1976, I think it was Kareem. As for will we see another scenario like this again in the NBA? Probably not. With the amount of teams that make the playoffs now, it's very rare that one of the top players doesn't lead their team to the playoffs. There are only a few times in recent memory that one of the 5 best players in the league wasn't representing the playoffs. LeBron is the most recent example in 2019, but he got hurt during that season and missed 15 games. Before that, only Kobe in 2005 and maybe Kevin Garnett from 05 to 07 were the only healthy superstars to miss the playoffs. With the freedom and power players hold in today's NBA, teams have no choice to bend backwards to meet the demands of their stars, or they risk them leaving. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. I thought it was pretty interesting. I feel like Kareem's whole NBA career in general is kind of not talked about a lot in the NBA YouTube landscape, so it's pretty interesting to find out about how he won an MVP and didn't even make the playoffs that season. But if you enjoyed the video, like it, comment, subscribe, turn on the bell for post notifications to get updated when another video releases. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.